Hello everyone. This is Class 2, Supporting Students with Low Incidence Disabilities, Legal and Cultural Underpinnings. Our agenda for today, we're going to do a really quick check-in. Then we're going to go over the history of low incidence treatment. We're going to go over IDEA or IDEA. It's used interchangeably to refer to that legislation, Section 504, ADA, and then we'll do a quick wrap-up and a look to the future. So first, I just want to check in with you. How are you? We had our first class. I've gotten a lot of your assignments already. I hope that you are feeling good. You're feeling like you know what's going on. And if you're not, please reach out via email and let me know, how can I support you? So many of you have already reached out and let me know what I can be doing, how I can help make you successful in the classroom, which that truly is my goal. I want you to get everything out of this class that you possibly can. I want you to feel successful, and I want you to have a great foundation carrying you into your special education teacher career. Just want to remind you, my office hours are Wednesdays, 3:30 to 4:30 p.m. Although if you go this Wednesday, I was having a little bit of audio issues with the recording of the Microsoft Word PowerPoint. I think we got it all together, but it took me a little bit. So I might be a little bit late to office hours today, June 17th. Just checking it is the 17th. But you can also reach me by appointment. If you need an appointment and you email me, please give me 3 dates and times that work for you, just so we have a launching pad to find a time that'll work for both of us. So before you watch this lecture, you should have read the readings, which was the overview of SPED law. That was a website that was listed on Blackboard under Class 1, and the Zirkle article from 2015 that is also on Blackboard under Class 1. In addition to those readings, you should have watched the documentaries Willowbrook and Remembering Willowbrook. Again, those are on Blackboard under Class 1. If you are having issues accessing any of those, or the link didn't work for you, please reach out to me via email. So Thursday night, sometime after 8:30, I will open Tuesday's June 23rd's materials, and you are to read those readings before class. It's 3 readings, but we'll talk about that at the end of the lecture. Tonight's class, or Thursday's class in-class assignment, is due by 11:59 on June 18th. So if you're doing it on Thursday, if you're watching this video on Thursday, it is due tonight, June 18th at 11:59. If you're watching it earlier, it is due Thursday, again, June 18th by 11:59. I believe the Chicagoland area is experiencing some inclement weather, and we might have some inclement weather coming. So if something happens to your power, to your Wi-Fi, or something is going on, I can be flexible. Just let me know what's going on. Make sure to communicate. I am available by email. All right, our class objectives. Also, I just want to tell you, I have multiple screens. So if my attention turns, it's because I have multiple and I'm looking at my notes and also what's going on. Now we've gotten that out of the way. Our objectives for this class are for you to be able to describe the history of support for individuals with low incidence disabilities in the U.S. So a reminder, low incidence disabilities means not frequently occurring. That means there are not that many diagnoses and there are not very many new cases per year. Describe the purpose of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So again, that's referred to IDEA, or some people will refer to it as the IDEA. I might use it interchangeably. People will use those terms interchangeably, but this is the legislation that they are referring to. So you'll be able to list and describe the provisions of IDEA, list and describe the purpose and components of Section 504 and the Rehabilitation Act, and list and describe the purpose and the components of the Americans with Disability Act, ADA, and describe the major differences between IDEA, Section 504, and the ADA. So, setting the stage for IDEA. The Willowbrook documentaries. So, I want you to think and reflect on what you watched, on what you saw. This will be tonight's assignment. What are your thoughts on Willowbrook? I know if you've never seen it before, it's a really hard watch because you may or may not have been aware of what conditions people with disabilities, particularly children with disabilities, were subjected to, the kind of care and treatment that people with disabilities were subjected to, in the mid 1900s. But it's another thing to see it. It's another thing to have video, to have someone on screen telling you that the smell in the facility was so nauseating that they almost felt like they were going to vomit. It's very different to hear and kind of read those things and then to actually see it. And that's why there was such an outrage in the country, and that's why we had all of this fallout legislation. So I want to know, what are your thoughts and reactions on Willowbrook? What are your major takeaways or your aha moments? What did you learn from that documentary that you didn't know before? I also want you to think about, what was the impact of public advocacy and media exposure on addressing the issues at Willowbrook? How did the documentary contribute to raising awareness and influencing politics? So your in-class activity, you're going to write a reflection on the Willowbrook documentaries, answering all those questions I just posed to you. So the assignment can be found in two different places. You can look under the assignments tab and it will say Willowbrook reflection, or you can look under class 2. If you do the drop down, you will also see at the bottom there is the in-class activity Willowbrook reflection. So the directions and the rubric are listed on the assignment. There is no word count. It should be at least half a page, but no more than 2 pages double spaced. I am grading you on content, but, big but, you should be using correct grammar, and please proofread. So again, your Willowbrook reflection is due by 11:59 on Thursday night, June 18th. If you have any questions, please reach out by email. All right, what is IDEA? IDEA. It's the Individuals with Disability Education Act. It is a federal law. It's not a state law. It's a federal law, and it guarantees that students with disabilities receive a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. You are going to hear that phrase a lot in this presentation, and also a lot over the lifetime of your special education teaching career, or whatever role you play in the special education realm. Again, IDEA guarantees that students with disabilities receive a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. And if you've never heard any of these terms, we're going to talk about them. It also gives students IEPs and supports to meet their needs in the classroom. So IDEA, or IDEA, as of 2020, which was the last time it was reauthorized. Part A is the foundation of IDEA. So it explains the laws and the definition, and it sets the groundwork for how the rest of the law is structured. So think of it as the instruction manual. It kind of outlines the purpose, the terms, the legal guidelines for how services should be provided to students with disabilities. Then you have Part B, and this is the most well-known part of IDEA because it applies to school-age children. So children ages 3 through 22. So that's pre-K through 22. Pre-K starts at 3. As soon as students turn 3, students with disabilities, they are allowed to enter the school system. And then students on the other end of the spectrum that are 18 are allowed to stay in school and receive services all the way through their 22nd birthday. Then Part C, this part focuses primarily on early intervention for children from birth to age 3. So a little bit of a historical overview. The original law was passed in 1975, or the original education law for children with disabilities was passed in 1975 as the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. It's been reauthorized over the years, first in 1986, then in 1990, 1997, and then in 2004. So Part B. Again, this is the most well-known part of IDEA because it applies to school-age children from ages 3 through 22. So these are the rules that ensure students with disabilities receive the supports that they need in school. And if you look on the slide, these are the different parts. So there's zero reject, there's FAP, so free and appropriate public education, non-discriminatory evaluation and placement, least restrictive environment, there's that term again, parent and student participation, and then procedural safeguards. And we're going to go over each part, each component. So zero reject. Children with disabilities who have an educational need for special education cannot be denied those services or supports. So before IDEA, schools could just reject students if they didn't feel that they had the right resources or supports to serve them, Or essentially if they just didn't want them in the school and they could use that excuse, well, we don't have the resources. Now, I want to be very clear that this set of rules, IDEA only applies to schools that take federal money. So private schools who rely on the funds from the families and the students that go there, they don't have to follow these rules because they don't take federal dollars. So I just want to make that really clear. 2, a free and appropriate public education. So FAP. Students with disabilities cannot be denied access to public school. It has to be at no cost to parents or guardians or whoever is giving care to the child. They receive individualized instruction and supports, and it's based on evaluation, which we will talk about in a little bit. The individualized education plan, that is what IEP stands for. So it's developed annually by the IEP team. It's based on the present levels of performance. Sometimes you might see the acronym PLOP. That's what that means, the present level of performance. That just means where is the student currently functioning at. Participation in assessment, there'll be annual goals and objectives. The services provided will be in there. The extent of participation in the general education setting and extracurricular activities, assessment and evaluation. So there is a section on how students are assessed. And then transition goals start at age 16 or maybe 14, depending on the state that you're in, which when you are in schools and when you are a special education teacher, your case manager will be helping you with all of these specifics. So IEP goals and objectives. If you have never seen an IEP, which I think many of you probably have, but if you haven't at this point, you have the overarching goal. So let's say that my IEP was written in September. So my overarching goal is going to be a really broad statement indicating what the student should be able to do at the end of the instructional period. So usually that's a year, the broad goal. It's over a year, so a September to a September, or like a September to maybe beginning of August. And then for each of this goal, they're going to have benchmarks or smaller objectives, which are specific and measurable steps the student must be able to complete in order to meet the larger goal. So let's say it was being able to identify all of the unique sounds in the alphabet. Maybe your first objective is that they're able to do 5 sounds with high levels of support. Then the next goal might be they're doing 10 sounds with medium levels of supports. Again, you would be far more specific than what I'm saying. I'm just trying to give you an example. And then your third objective might be that it's 16 sounds with low support. Do you see what I'm saying? Like kind of moving along that continuum, those digestible sized bites until you're able to meet the overarching goal. Related service and supplementary aids. So related services are whatever is needed to access the curriculum. Medical services not performed by a physician will also be in there. So that's feeding tubes, catheterization, trichectomy tubes. Also related service providers are going to be in there. So those are your speech language pathologists, your SLPs, your occupational therapist, your physical therapist, psychological services, social work, orientation and mobility, vocational rehabilitation, audiology, counseling, assistive technology, a behavior analyst, recreation services, and transportation. All of that will be highlighted and referenced in the IEP, whatever the student qualifies for and whatever the student needs. So non-discriminatory evaluation and placement. So evaluations are used to determine if a student has a disability. They're used to identify what kind of special education and related services that the student needs. So what does that mean when we say non-discriminatory? This means that the evaluation process must be comprehensive. It has to use multiple tools and not just one test. It has to be unbiased, so it has to be free from racial, cultural, or linguistic bias. It has to be accurate and fair. The tools must be technically sound, so that means reliable and valid. They have to be accessible, so they have to be given in the child's native language or form that they understand. So if a student can't read, you can't just sit them in front, of a piece of paper. Administrated properly. So evaluators must be trained professionals. You must be trained in the evaluation or in the assessment that you are giving. They have to be focused. They have to assess the child in all areas related to the suspected disability. Again, assessment validity. It must ensure that the assessments measure what they are supposed to measure. That's validity. So it's looking at exactly what it says that it's looking at. It must consider student level factors, so cognitive abilities, sensory processing, language. The bottom line is that evaluations must be fair and they must measure what they claim to measure. Then we have LRE, which is least restrictive environment. If you end up working in Chicago public schools, that's like literally an entire setting, just LRE, like an entire section. There's a presumption in favor of inclusion. It does happen on a like kind of a continuum, the continuum of what the least restrictive environment is, or like a continuum of environment. Generally, you want to give students as much access to general education curriculum and their general education peers as humanly possible. Again, this is a continuum of services. So, there's paraprofessional, accommodations, modifications, assistive technology. So this was the visual that I was talking about. When you're thinking of least restrictive environment or LRE, we're kind of talking about a continuum, like that spans from least restrictive to most restrictive. So the least restrictive environment on this continuum is the general education classroom. Then moving along the spectrum would be a self-contained special education classroom. And then the next would be a special school or a specialty school, where the overwhelming majority of students at that school have a diagnosed disability, either all or like a very high percentage, like 75% to 100%. Then there is homebound services. So if for whatever reason a student is not able to come to school and cannot get their services, then someone will come to their home and deliver said services. And the most restrictive would be hospitalization or a residential facility where the student is living there and spending 100% of their time at that facility. Children with disabilities should be educated alongside their peers without disability to the maximum extent possible. I just want to also make it clear that the least restrictive environment for some children is not the general education classroom because of what would need to happen to allow them to be successful in it. It really is on a case-by-case basis, and it needs to be a team decision, a team discussion, and when we're thinking about that whole person and all of their needs and how those interact with each other and how that gives you a clearer picture of the student. So determining LRE, the least restrictive environment. So we're looking at this kind of flow chart. You're going to evaluate and identify individual student needs, right? You're going to do all of the assessment. You're going to see where the deficits are, what the supports they need to be successful. Then you're going to identify what the goals are. And then for each goal, you're going to identify what services, what supports are needed for that student to be successful. And then you're going to determine the placement to address each goal. So it is possible that students can be in different settings for different subjects. Like maybe you are getting all of your language arts minutes in the general education classroom, but you're getting a percentage of your mathematics minutes in a special education classroom. A wide variety of combination of that happens all the time. So when you're trying to determine placement for each of these goals, you want to think to yourself, can the student be successful with special education and related services delivered in this setting with accommodations or modifications as needed? If the answer is yes, great, awesome, they're in the general education classroom. If the answer is no, they're not going to be successful with that. You're going to move along the continuum of placement. So you're going to move over to special education, because remember, the least restrictive environment on this continuum is the general education classroom, and you just decided in this flow chart that, you know what, that's actually not going to meet the needs of my student. So we move to the next step. You guys are going to, again, on the IEP team, and you're going to think to yourself, Can this student be successful with special education and related services delivered in this setting, in the special education classroom setting, with accommodations or modifications as needed? If the answer is yes, all right then, that's your placement in the special education classroom. If the answer is no, you continue to move down the spectrum until you find the correct placement where a student is going to be able to get all of their needs met so that they can be successful and they can access the curriculum. So again, you're going to move through this continuum, ask these questions until you land on what is their least restrictive environment. Parent and student participation. So parents have the right to access school records. Parents have the right to control who has access to those school records. So it's not just they have access to those records, they have the right to say yes or no who can see those records. Rights are transferred to the student at the age of majority. That's usually 18, but it might differ per state. Again, that's something that your case manager will support you with. Then there's procedural due process. That's where accountability and conflict resolution come up. That's when parents or caregivers or the guardian or the student do not agree with the IEP, or they don't agree with some of the statements or some of what the district has come to, what the resolution or the services recommended. Sometimes there is a disagreement between those two parties. Sometimes it does have to move to mediation, or sometimes it does result in a lawsuit. Then the lawyers are involved and a court will help them work through that. Procedural safeguards. So these are the rules for how a school and a family should ideally collaborate in order to best serve the student. So you have parent participation. Parents, caregivers, the guardian should be involved in the IEP process as much as they possibly can be. You should be giving, parent surveys or doing parent interviews. Remember, parents and families are one of your best resources. They are the experts on their children, and they should be treated and respected as such. There are rules and regulations on when parents, caregivers, guardians should receive a draft of the IEP, but when a parent or caregiver comes to the meeting, that should not be the first time that they've ever seen the IEP, they've ever talked with you about the IEP, or that they have no idea where the goals are coming from or the present level of performance of their student. So you want to make sure that parents, again, caregivers, guardians, whoever is caring for the child is actively involved in the IEP process and where their student stands and in their levels of performance and what's going on in the classroom. Again, they have the right to have access to the educational records. They have a right to confidentiality. This is a big one, not discussing students with other people or in the hallways, or with other teachers or people who are not really on the IEP team. That student and their family, they do have a right to confidentiality. Informed consent. Parent, caregiver, whoever is signing for the student should understand what they're signing. It should be in their native language or in a language that they understand or are proficient in. They need prior written notice before the IEP meeting happens. And again, your case manager will be helping you with all of these forms, printing them out, getting them home and sent home to the caregiver and making sure they get sent back. Their procedural safeguard and independent educational evaluation. Parents do have the right to request that. It hasn't happened to me very often, but I have been in a situation where a parent didn't agree with some of the conclusions that were made by the IEP team. They wanted an independent educational evaluation, and that was their right. The stay put rights. So that's exactly what it sounds like. When there's a dispute between guardians and parents and the district, the student in question stays put. They stay placed exactly where they are in their current environment, wherever they are on the LRE spectrum. They continue to receive the same services, the same accommodations, and the same modifications until an agreement is reached. And they do have a right to dispute the resolution. So parents basically have a right to dispute the IEP. They have a right after you go to mediation to say this wasn't good enough and to move forward to court. So again, your case manager will help you along with those procedural safeguards and guiding you in getting the parents or the guardians the forms, getting things signed in a timely manner, making sure that the IEP draft is sent when it's supposed to be, but this is something good for you just to be aware of what the parents and the caregivers have rights to, and what they should be getting. Part C of IDEA. It provides services to infants and toddlers who show developmental delays or have diagnosed conditions. So for young children, it might be that mom, dad, caregiver, or pediatrician had concerned and then they were referred, or some, students are born with a disability and that's diagnosed at birth, and then they are, entered into early intervention that way. So these services often involve working closely with families, and they are delivered through an individualized family service plan, an IFSP. It's really focused on family participation. Again, this is birth to age 3. Once students reach age 3, they move to Part B, and then they move to the local school district. But again, it focuses on family participation. The services are delivered in the setting where the school spends the majority of his or her time. So it might be in the home, it might be at preschool, it might be at daycare, it might be at grandma's house. I've even met people like at a park where they spent a lot of time when I was working in early intervention, and the focus is on prevention. So kind of the core components of Part C. So again, early childhood intervention. Services are provided based on the needs of the family. So this is a really big difference between an IEP, an individualized education plan, and an IFSP, an individualized family services plan, is you're really kind of thinking holistically about the family. What are the goals of the family? How are we going to make the family successful? What does success for the family look like? And what are the skills? What can we work on that will help move the family to that goal? Once they move to Part B and they get on an IEP, it's really, really just focused on the student, how to make them successful in the school setting, and of course to have transferable skills, but it's really just focused on what the student needs once they have an IEP, as opposed to what the family unit requires in Part C in early intervention. So when you're in early intervention, you'll have a case manager. They'll be planning for next steps when you transition from having an IFSP to having an IEP. Sometimes, in my experience, it can be like a little bit of a stressful process. Sometimes the ball gets dropped and assessments aren't done in a timely manner. So sometimes there's like a little bit of gap in services, but really the whole goal of early intervention and the hope is that it's a smooth transition from getting those early intervention services to moving to school-based services. It also has its own collaborative team when you're making the IFSP, again, that individualized family services plan. You have the family, you have the case manager, you have any related service personnel. So those are your speech language pathologist, your physical therapist, your occupational therapist, behavior analyst, whoever is deemed appropriate for services for that child, and a social worker. So again, the IFSP, it's a plan for the family. It lists the services the child receives, and it considers the family priorities, what the family needs, and the child's present level of performance, and it will list goals and objectives, similarly to an IEP, but not exactly the same. Other key legislation. So other important legislation is the Americans with Disability Act, ADA, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which you might have heard people just talking about, a 504 plan, and then the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA, which might also be an acronym that you have heard before. So the Americans with Disability Act, ADA, what is it? It's a civil rights law that was passed in 1990. Its purpose was to prohibit discrimination based on disability in all areas of public life, so including schools, jobs, transportation, and public-private spaces open to the public. The key point of this legislation is that it applies regardless of federal funding. So whether you get federal dollars or you don't get federal dollars, you have to follow the Americans with Disability Act in both K-12. You have to follow it to ensure equal access and reasonable accommodations in both K-12 and higher education, and also in public and private spaces. So then there's Section 4 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. So what is it? It's a civil rights law that protects individuals with disability. Its purpose was to ensure that students with disability are not excluded or denied participation in programs or activities that receive federal financial assistance. Again, those federal dollars. The key point of this is that it provides accommodations and supports through a 504 plan, which is probably the term you've heard before, for students who may not qualify for an IEP under IDEA. So remember, you have to do that assessment and evaluation. You have to qualify through that. So these are for students who might not qualify for an IEP, but they still need help accessing the education, or they need help accessing the curriculum. So to qualify, a student has to be between the ages of 3 and 22. So again, that part B being in the school system. Have a physical or mental disability that significantly impairs their ability to engage in or participate in life activities. Some common disabilities that might use a 504 instead of having an IEP is ADHD, asthma, epilepsy, depression. You might also have something going on like a degenerative eye disease. Those are some of more common ones. But again, it's all up to the team and what services are required, unique services are required to help the specific student be successful. The Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. So FERPA, what is it? It's a federal law enacted in 1974. Its purpose was to protect the privacy of student education records. So the big key point is that it gives parents and students over 18, or that age of majority, the right to access their education records, to request corrections, to control who sees the records. FERPA applies to all schools that receive funds from the U.S. Department of Education, or anyone who, is taking like federal dollars. I know there's kind of a lot of, going back and forth of where education services are kind of under in terms of legislation and what arm and what legislative body or what organization. So just continue to stay looking in the news, and we can talk about it in class if you guys want to, but that would be my best advice, is just continue to stay updated on, who's handling what and where services currently fall under, like who's overseeing those services. So a summary: high quality, inclusive, equitable services were not always available to individuals with low incidence disabilities. IDEA was the first piece of federal legislation to support students with disabilities, or IDEA. Other pieces of legislation have been passed to support individuals with low incidence disabilities beyond the school setting, aka ADA. So a little bit of a wrap up. So next week on Tuesday, June 23rd, we will meet on Zoom at 4:30. The class link is linked on Blackboard in that Start Here section. I did lift kind of all the security permissions, so if you have the link, you should just be able to come right in. So whether you're on your phone or your iPad or your computer, or you're having to kind of triangulate or switch between all three of them, I shouldn't need to admit you should be able to just come right in. So hopefully we won't waste any of that transition time. For class next Tuesday, you're going to have 3 readings. Chapter 1 of Orlov, so that's the textbook. And then you're going to have Dillon et al., which is from 2021, and that's an article. And then you'll have Dilberto et al., which is a 2012 article. And both those 2 articles are going to be linked on Blackboard under Class 3, which will be available sometime Thursday evening, as I said before. But again, if ever in doubt, go to the Blackboard. What you need will be there. So again, you're going to do those 3 class readings for next Tuesday. Thursday evening after 8:30, I will unveil and everything will be available for you. So you're going to do these before class. There will be a Tuesday participation activity that will be due that night, but you don't need to do anything for it. You don't need to see it. You don't need to look at it, because we're going to do it in class. You're going to start it in class. You're going to start it in your small groups. Maybe you will finish it and then you'll just be able to turn it in. Or if you need more time, you'll have that 6:30 to 8:30 block to work on it with me, or, on your own, or through the rest of the evening, up to you. But I will just need it Tuesday at 11:59, but we will talk about that. If there's something that we've discussed that I'm working on getting for you or getting an answer for you, give me until Friday. And if you haven't heard from me, then give me a nudge. I'm still kind of waiting to hear back from some people. The interview assignment specifics will be posted sometime Sunday, and then we will discuss in class on June 23rd. So if you see it posted and you're reading through, hold all of your questions until we're back together on June 23rd. Of course, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. You can join me at my office hours. You can ask for an appointment, or you can wait until we see each other next Tuesday. Otherwise, please be safe. I know there's going to be some inclement weather this week, and I will see you next week.